watching this on the broadcast live function too on YouTube. And as Sinead said, we'll be recording it. So some people have already started to do this, but if you could put your name and the organization you're from in the chat function, it'd be great just to sort of get a sense of who's in the room, as they say. And feel free to use the chat function or indeed the Q&A function to ask questions, because there will be a Q&A session later on, and there will be a number of people from the OECD team as well available as part of that too. So that's fantastic. I'm kicking us all off with just a few introductory remarks. Firstly, just to thank all of the speakers who are here today and the panelists. I think we've got something really special lined up. And from our perspective, for those who don't know me, I'm CEO with The Wheel. And this event in this way with these speakers, it's a first indeed for our sector, and indeed it's a first for us in The Wheel, to bring the OECD and the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science to you all, and indeed to our sector. And the reason that we're doing that is because the department has invited the OECD to review Ireland's current national skills strategy and to advise them on their development of a new skills strategy sometime early in 2023 when they will publish it. Emma can tell us more. So, and we're doing this and all of the other work that you'll hear about over the next 2 hours because it's very important to see our sector's role fully supported in that. And when I use the words our sector, I really want us to sort of free associate into the broadest constellation or understanding of the phrase non-profit sector that we can think of. So it's bigger and larger than the members of The Wheel. It's bigger and larger than registered charities. So it's big enough to include all of those, plus sporting bodies, arts bodies. As I said, the broadest constellation of non-profit sector that we can imagine, or third sector, as it's often called in the UK, or civil society, as is quite often called in the EU sense. So by the end of today's session, you'll see very clearly why we have not only taken the step today, but why we have relentlessly prioritized this area of work over the last 5 years, in particular in The Wheel. So I can promise you by the time we finish today, you will appreciate the importance and relevance of Ireland's national skills strategy and accompanying ecosystem to our sector, as I said, in its broadest interpretation of our sector. Another piece of translation that I'll do up front relates to the translating that we often do in our sector in so many different places. So for example, when someone says or uses the word business or enterprise or companies, we here today, and quite often in many different forms, we must understand that this is completely relevant to our world. It's not some other sector. So particularly in relation to today's agenda, these words are completely relevant to us. We tend to use words like organization or group or charity. So for the purposes of today, because we're in a learning and exploratory space here, all of these words should be seen to be the same. So that goes sort of in both directions of that translation. So before I get into outlining the schedule for the session, I just wanted to say a few words about context. So as you know, The Wheel has been a major provider of short course upskilling programs for the sector for well over 20 years now. And over the years, we have augmented this through accredited and indeed unaccredited longer form educational upskilling and support programs delivered primarily with partners. For example, our 6-day certificate in charity law, governance and trusteeship with the Law Society, the 13-day level 8 accredited transformative leadership program with Community Action Network and with Maynooth University, and the 12-day Leadership for Change accredited program at level 9, delivered in conjunction with the National College of Ireland. So there's just a few examples there. But over the past 5 years in particular, and spurred on by our vision of seeing our sector as thriving and also at the heart of a fair, just and inclusive Ireland, we sought to put our sector on the map in the public policy spaces where we felt the sector was not significantly present up to that point. So my colleague Mairead will summarise very swiftly some of the research and stakeholder engagement we have led out on since then. Public policy work is a long game business, as we know. And in our current strategy, signed off on less than a year ago by the board and then by our members, and as a result of assessing the progress we made in this space in recent years and the potential both for our sector and for Ireland in terms of what our sector can help with and what our sector can contribute, our board determined to make human capital development, or upskilling in regular language, a core priority for our public policy work. And so now this complements the practical training, upskilling and support programs we've been rolling out for years. So I'll come back at the very end to close off some remarks about what our plans are for the future, but on to today's agenda. So if I could ask Mairead to share the slide, please. First of all, the hashtag CV sector skills is the hashtag for today. If you could use that and talk about this session as you go through, it would be great to build up a little bit of momentum around this. So, and if we move on to the agenda, as the registration page noted, there's over 500,000 people either employed or volunteering regularly in our sector across Ireland. And it's through the knowledge, skills and efforts of this talented workforce that we deliver innovative and high quality services and engagement for and with communities. And we also have another attribute which makes our sector unique, namely our reach into families and communities as trusted entities in their lives. And this access means that in addition to our core work in serving different populations' needs directly, we can also access traditionally hard to reach populations and help deliver other national priorities like the upskilling agenda. And to a large extent, our colleagues in adult and community education have been doing that for many years. Aintus and Nala. And new strategies in these areas from Sullus have copper fastened this. But the potential is so much more than currently availed of. And if community and voluntary sector organisations are core partners on those community and adult education programmes and strategies, then the organisations themselves and their leaders must be invested in from the perspective of CPD to be able to make their rightful contribution. So we have designed today's session in order to help our sector thrive and keep up with the constantly changing nature of the modern world so that our people can have the talent nurtured and skills developed and have access to the skills they need in order to succeed. So this is a key part of what that is. And as you can see, we'll be moving in a minute now on to hear from the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. Emma Kinsella is the Assistant Principal Officer in the Skills and Policy and Enterprise Engagement Unit in that department, and her role is to develop strategic policy in relation to high-level skills issues and to support the implementation of the National Skills Agenda. After that, I'll be introducing Mairead O'Connor, and I'll introduce her at the time from the wheel. And then we're delighted to have Bart Stats from the OECD, who is leading out on this review, working with the department, and I'll introduce him more fully at the time. And then I will be passing to a really, really interesting panel of speakers chaired by Mary Doyle, who I will introduce at the time, and she will then introduce the panelists. So the idea is to set the scene for you, to explain the why, to engage and listen to a little bit of background from the wheel, to understand some of where the OECD get into the nuts and bolts of this, and then to sort of talk with our panel and in front of you and with you in terms of the Q&A as to the reaction to what you've heard. And indeed, if I could point you to a primer document, a sort of a starter for 10 that we have prepared and sent out to all of you. And I think it's posted in the chat function there now as a link if you want to see. So we've given that to all our panelists, and they might make some comment on that. It is I guess, the beginnings and the skeleton of what we will be making ultimately to the OECD as a formal submission from us and you in the coming weeks. So thank you very much for that. I'm now going to pass over and invite Emma Kinsella, as I've already introduced, to, I guess, come to the stage, as they say. I'll switch off my camera and microphone and invite Emma to do the opposite. And as I said, Emma is in the department, I guess, the lead on this review and strategic policy and the national skills. Thank you very much, and over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Deirdre, and thank you so much, everybody, for having myself and Bart here today. Rather than get into, I suppose, the nuts and bolts of the OECD review, which Bart will take you through in due course later on this morning, really what I just want to do today is set the scene about the importance of skills. And as Deirdre said, you know, your sector is an important partner for us in driving forward the skills agenda. You know, when we think about enterprise, we think about your sector as well. It's not, you know, just factories and you know, engineering plants and so on that need to think about skills and upskilling their people. It's also people in your sector. So I suppose from our point of view, you know, we would see skills as being a transformative good for society, for the economy, but also for individuals. It is, you know, really important that people have the opportunities to upskill and reskill for their own well-being, for their own opportunities, for their own employment prospects, you know, and their own avoidance of, you know, risk of poverty and so on. But it's also really important for the people who are employing to understand the importance of skills as a driver of their own sort of productivity, of their own ability to retain people, of their own innovation capacity. So the right skills can help on a range of levels. And we know in Ireland that, you know, there are things that we do very well. You know, we have really improved over the last number of years in terms of our rates of early school leavers, in terms of our rates of tertiary participation. But there are also things that we can do better. And we're now at a midpoint of our national skills strategy, which was designed to help us put a structure on how we do better in developing human capital and developing upskilling and reskilling opportunities for everybody across the state. That strategy was developed at a time where we knew that there were certain things that we were going to have to deal with. So we knew that, you know, the digitization agenda, the automation agenda, the world of work was changing. But that's only been accelerated over the past number of years with the challenges of COVID, of Brexit, and so on. And there are also, I suppose, things that we hadn't necessarily considered at that time around, you know, remote working, remote learning, around the need for more flexible and modular provision of skills. So all those things being equal, it was timely for us to do a review of the skills strategy that we have in place and to look at, you know, where the gaps are, what we're doing well, what we can do better on, and so on. So we're working in partnership with the OECD to do this over the course of this year. The OECD are taking a really holistic view of the skills ecosystem. So that means not just, you know, how government works together across government, but how we work with other actors, how we work with enterprise like yourselves, how we work with voluntary organizations, how we work with you know, the workers organizations, how we work with learners organizations, how we work with people who, you know, are not traditionally in the fold when we talk about skills, and who we want to work with more. So the OECD are going to, we hope, help us develop a blueprint for how we can go forward together in partnership over the next number of years to meet those challenges, to address our challenges around, you know, participation by adults in learning, to meet our challenges around the data that we make decisions based upon, to meet our challenges about how we work together and in a coherent fashion so that we're not all off doing, you know, sort of separate little siloed pieces of work. So there's an enormous piece of work being done through the year on this whole review, the review of, as I say, the strategies underpinning what we do, but also the structures around how we deliver those issues. Now, having said that, we're not sitting on our hands waiting for the OECD, I suppose, to come down from the mountains and tell us everything that we need to do going forward. Like there are challenges that we have already identified at an early stage of our work around, as I say, increasing in particular adult learning in adult participation in learning, and in particular cohorts and how we can reach those cohorts and how we can support people in those cohorts to you know, understand the value of skills for themselves, for their employment prospects, but also for their own well-being. There are other things like you know, the navigability of the system. So we've heard from people like yourselves and from others that we've engaged with that there is a lot of offering out there in terms of upskilling and reskilling and learning opportunities throughout the life cycle. But it can be quite difficult to navigate that offering. And that's something that we're conscious of and we want to do better on. And that Bart will probably speak a little bit more to in his presentation. One of the key things that I would like to pick up on that Deirdre mentioned there to you is, public policy takes a long time to change. It's not a quick process, but it is something that everybody should have a voice on. We're very eager to hear from your organization and the likes of the people that you represent in how we shape that policy. And, Deirdre and Mairead have been involved with us in relation to the workshops that the OECD have held so far, in relation to the stakeholder engagement opportunities that we've held so far. And, we've spoken with them, and which is wonderful, but it's also wonderful to have the opportunity to hear directly through the panel discussion today about issues that are affecting you on the ground, and to take them away and feed them into our work with the OECD. So, Deirdre, I think that's pretty much me, just in terms of a scene setting. Happy to stay on and hear, of course, all the feedback. And indeed, I know that the OECD team will be staying around for the panel discussion and Q&As, but I'm also equally happy to take Q&As at a later stage if that's helpful for people. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Emma. That was really helpful. And you pointed there at the end exactly to why we've put on today's event, so that you can hear directly from the people that we've been talking to for many years, because it does make an impact, and I think it does make a difference. And I really welcome the openness that you expressed there to engage to engage with the sector and these organizations. So thank you very much. I'm now going to invite my colleague Mairead O'Connor to come and present onto the stage, so to speak. Mairead is our Skills Development Senior Manager in the field. She drives all of our capacity building activities, including the brand new Leadership Academy, which is now managed by our colleague Sharon Hughes. And Mairead also works very much with stakeholders in the sector and policymakers, and in the ETB and SOLAS and tertiary education space, to ensure that non-profit organizations of all types and those that work for them are well served by the state's skills development infrastructure. So Mairead is going to give us a potted summary of the work that has brought us to today. So over to you, Mairead. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre, and hi everybody. Lovely to see such a big turnout. Very exciting event for us today. So I'm just going to share some slides with you. And as Deirdre said, it will be potted. I will be brief, but I do want to give, I suppose, what is an overview of the workforce, really, and that we're talking about, and kind of the context that we're kind of setting today's conversation in, and the National Skills Strategy Review that Emma has outlined for us, kind of where it meets our sector. So just, I suppose, firstly, the sector itself, it's a very large and diverse one, and I guess even some of these stats can be interesting for people who work in the sector. It's not always, we don't always have that kind of wider sense of the context and the sector in which we work. There are over 33,000 organizations, community, voluntary, charitable, social enterprise right across the sector, and it's a large employer, our sector. 170,000 plus people working every day in our sector, alongside hundreds of thousands of volunteers, of whom some of them are the board members, the voluntary board members, the trustees of our organizations. The sector also has a very large economic footprint, over 14 billion euros every year in income. And a large proportion of that is actually generated by the sector itself through its own independent fundraising. So a very significant sector in terms of scale and size, but also in terms of the reach of the sector. And I suppose when I talk about reach, I'm talking about the fact that the sector touches everybody in Ireland in terms of how it operates at community level. All of our lives are touched in some way by some element of the sector, whether that's the local sporting club or a social service that's provided in our region through a voluntary organisation, youth work, environmental protection, arts, heritage, you name it. Our sector is involved in it, and involved in it in every community in Ireland. And I suppose that touches on Emma's point about this area of policy being a whole of society piece. This is something that touches on all of our lives, and so our sector can be a key partner in that work. I suppose, reach as well that the sector has allows us really to be a key partner in public policy areas like this, because we are engaging with communities that are often very difficult to engage with for public policy initiatives. So we are, I suppose, a key element of the social fabric, and so we can be, I suppose, a way to really engage with communities that might be harder to engage with in these particular areas. And I guess one of the starkest illustrations of that recently has been during the COVID pandemic, and we've seen our sector being a really integral part of the emergency response, not only to COVID-19, but also more recently to the Ukrainian refugee crisis as well. And just a key stat that I've highlighted on the slide there, it's part of research that the We Act campaign have done in recent times, which found that 70% of people believe that the lives of people in their communities would be impacted if charities disappeared overnight. So again, that sense of just the our sector being that invisible infrastructure right across the country. But who is delivering, I suppose, this reach? Who is delivering these services? Who's involved in all of this? Again, this workforce that we're talking about that's actually on the front line is large, 170,000 employees right across all of the elements of the sector in its widest sense. And you can see there in the illustration on the slide, all of the various subsectors. I suppose a large proportion of the employees are concentrated in particular subsectors like health, social services, housing, etc. But there are people employed right across all, and obviously supported by hundreds of thousands of volunteers. Another interesting element that came through in our research into and our looking at the labour force within the sector is that 1 in every 3 people who delivers a public service in Ireland actually works for a charitable community or voluntary organisation. That's not always obvious to the service user or to wider society, you know, at the point of actually accessing the service, but really important for us to note that, to know it as a sector, to note it as well in terms of this context of the skills review and the national skills strategy, because obviously really vital that those workers have the skills they need to meet the big challenges facing our public services and our society at the moment. The sector is, as I said, a large employer and employs actually more people than either agri-food or hospitality. Again, interesting to note that in the context of this conversation, and we need to kind of, you know, realise that as a sector and be able to kind of, I suppose, talk about it in richer terms. And I guess that's what we're trying to do with the research that we're doing in this space. And one of the lenses that we're bringing to this conversation, I suppose, is looking at what is the characteristics, what is the profile of this workforce. And one of the pieces we've brought to it is looking at it through the Eurostat NACE classifications, so which classify different skill sets in different sectors. And when you look at our sector's workforce in light of the NACE classifications, you see that the skills in our sector are very similar to the skills in the public sector. So the workers have very similar skill sets between public and our sector. Very different skills in the commercial small and medium enterprise sector. So quite a different skill set in our sector to that sector. And then differently to both, I suppose, there is a unique context in which community and voluntary sector workers are operating. And that comes in the form of different governance and regulatory responsibilities, different types of reporting that's required of workers in our sector, impact measurement and income diversification being key measurements of how we work and how we support the work we do, working with volunteers, scheme workers in partnership with public agencies, etc. So a very, very different context in which these workers operate, but similar skills, if you like, to the public sector and very different skills to the SME sector. In terms then of how we I suppose, build up a picture of this workforce and what we've been doing to try and inform the work and the public policy advocacy work we've been doing in this space is research. And we've carried out 2 important studies in recent years, and I can share these, they're public accessible on our website. I can share the links with you after this. We worked with Indicon, the economists, to do an investment appraisal of upskilling in our sector. And we also partnered with our colleagues in Carmichael and the Department of Rural and Community Development to carry out a qualitative research project with Sheila Cahill Consulting into the support needs of the sector on the ground. So two really complementary and important reports that we published in recent times. The headline findings from Indicon are crucial to this conversation. They found that there is a critical skills gap in the nonprofit sector in Ireland. That's due in part to the levels of training in our sector being very low when you compare them to workers in other sectors and also to nonprofit workers in other jurisdictions. And I suppose consequently, there is a need for increased investment in skills enhancement in the sector. But crucially, they also found that this investment in upskilling in our sector will likely have a net positive cost benefit. For every €1 invested in upskilling in our sector, you will get on average, a return of almost €3. So a very positive message there, but obviously we need to address that skills gap and the training deficit in the sector. In terms of what's needed in terms of upskilling support and training, what the Cahill report found was a range of topics and areas of need in terms of the support and upskilling agenda. Things like communications and digital skills, leadership and management, obviously, in all its varied elements, impact measurement, volunteer management, etc. So a range of needs came up through that work that Sheila Cahill did. I suppose where we're coming to, or what are the emerging priorities and skills gaps that we've identified in that research and other surveys and research that we're doing. I suppose to try and bring a bit of coherence to it, the twin transitions, which the digital skills transition and the green skills transition, which are obviously big topics, not only in Ireland, but also at an EU level, are important for our sector. And you can see that coming through in the research, especially from the ground up, if you like, in terms of digital and IT skills. Organizations are identifying that for themselves. Green skills, not as much from the ground up yet, but I think from top down, we're going to be definitely seeing need for that. And I think we're going to soon kind of see the demand for that rise from organizational level. As I've mentioned, the skills gaps that the research has identified in terms at organizational level, leadership and management would be leading the way, IT digital skills, communications, marketing, fundraising, sales, etc. And I suppose looking ahead, we do a lot of horizon scanning and the future ready skills that we're seeing in terms of the cutting edge that organizations are on and a lot of innovation in our sector. What those organizations and those innovators are looking for are skills like innovation in service design and delivery, trauma-informed practice, impact measurement, etc. So there's a lot coming down the tracks as well, and we need to be able to look around those corners and address those skills needs in advance. In terms of a conclusion or where we're coming to with this work, I suppose the big headline piece is that, and again, it speaks to what Emma referenced earlier about this being a whole of society piece of work. There are huge social, environmental, technological, demographic, economic challenges for Ireland and the world. And our sector is at the heart of addressing those challenges alongside our colleagues in the public service and in the private sector. But we are there on the front line. 1 in 3 workers delivering public services is in our sector. Our sector is operating in every community in Ireland and is, as I say, on the front line in the response to these challenges. If there are critical skills gaps and training deficits, we need to address them, because in order to meet those challenges, we're going to need to upskill, we're going to need to produce new knowledge, we're going to have to change our behaviours as a society and at sectoral level too. And I guess we're willing and ready and able to do that. We want to the sector to be involved, to be at the heart of it. We've shown that we can, and we've shown, as I say, those examples of recent times in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our sector is ready and able and has the capacity, but we do need the support in terms of making sure that our skills and the skills of the workforce are prepared and ready for those challenges. The review of the National Skills Strategy, we see this as a really key opportunity for the sector to make sure that as public benefit organisations we're engaged in it, because this will affect every community, every citizen, but also as an employer. Our sector employs 170,000 citizens, so we kind of have that dual interest in this particular area. And I suppose from an organizational point of view, I know many of you here today are coming with that hat on, if you like. This really has an impact on things like the really pressing challenge at the moment around recruitment and retention of staff and volunteers, increasing our impact in the quality of services and maximising innovation. So this agenda really ties in with those obviously crucial areas of urgent pressure. And I suppose just to finally briefly mention it, Deirdre mentioned it, and I think Sinead has shared the link in the chat. We have produced this draft set of recommendations, which we're refining at the moment, and everything we hear today will help us to refine them as well. And we've been meeting with members and wider sector stakeholders as well to really ensure that we get a strong set of recommendations into this review, because I think it's a key opportunity for our sector's voice to be heard at the national level. Thanks very much. Looking forward to the rest of today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Mairead. That's fantastic. And that really sets the scene. And now I am going to invite Bart Stats from the OECD to switch on his camera and get ready to share his screen. He's a policy analyst in the OECD Centre for Skills, working on OECD's skills strategy projects. So he has over 9 years experience with the OECD, and he's been leading on the project in Ireland, and indeed a number of other skills strategy projects that he has led. He's coordinated several large-scale international events and skills policies, and contributed to a whole load of OECD skills strategy reports. So I have to say, Ireland's skills needs and ecosystem, couldn't be in one sense in more experienced hands in terms of coming in and listening with a whole team. In fairness, he has a team with him who are happy to participate in the questions when we get to it afterwards. So I'm going to hand over to you, Bart, to take us through where you've got to so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for this very kind introduction, and of course also thank you very much for inviting us to this event, because it's really a pleasure for us to present our projects and the results so far, and also to of course actively engage today with the community and voluntary sector in Ireland. So as mentioned, I'm joined here today by my colleagues Laura Resnikova, Tamara Friedman-Wilson and Heather Carey, and they will also be available to respond to any questions you may have later on in the Q&A. So yeah, in this presentation, which will be approximately 30 minutes, although I might try to go through it with some with a good pace. I would like to present the need. First of all, why skills matter. We give you an overview of the need, why we're doing this project now for Ireland, and then I will dive deeper into the 4 main priority areas for the projects, which are securing a balance in skills through a responsive and diversified supply of skills, fostering greater participation in lifelong learning in and outside of the workplace, which seems to be particularly interesting actually in need 4 and need your sector, given that there are these prominent skills gaps and training deficits. Also leveraging skills to drive innovation and strengthen the performance of firms. And last but not least, we talk also more about the broader governance across the joint up skills ecosystem. So to briefly start, explaining why we talk about skills. So first, we should define what we mean by skills, as the term can mean many different things to different people. So when most people think of skills, they think of technical and professional skills, the skills required to perform specific tasks in specific occupations. For example, the skills required to be a mechanic or a cook, a retail manager or nurse. But when the OECD talks about skills, we do mean these professional, technical and specialized knowledge and skills, but we also mean cognitive and metacognitive skills, such as literacy, numeracy, digital literacy. And these are really the key building blocks for developing other skills. And we also mean social and emotional skills, for instance, including perseverance, self-regulation, self-organization. And these are really the attitudes and behaviors that condition how we are able to develop other types of skills as well. So, like in many OECD countries, megatrends such as globalization, technological change, climate change, population aging are really having a profound impact on the Irish economy and society. And as an illustrative example, this figure on the left shows indeed how significant population aging is in Ireland. So the population aged over 65 in Ireland is expected to grow much more rapidly than in most OECD countries. So 31% growth compared to 30% in the OECD on average. And this will pose, of course, significant challenges to the structure of the Irish economy. For example, aging population means that productivity and skills will also increasingly become more important drivers of economic growth. And technological change will, of course, have a major impact on the Irish economy. And the digital transformation, of course, is a key driver also of job automation. As firms rely more on digital technologies to conduct their work, certain jobs, tasks, and in some cases entire job categories can become automated. And before the pandemic, actually, the OECD estimated that in Ireland, 16% of workers faced a high risk of seeing their jobs automated, and another 27% faced significant changes in their job tasks due to automation. So these megatrends already have had an impact on the economy, including by driving this trend towards job polarization. So we see that the highest job growth has really occurred in these kind of high-skilled occupations, while the share of low and especially medium-skilled occupations has been decreasing. And this trend is expected to continue. So based on the current projections, there will be an increase in the demand for the high-skilled workers in the upcoming decade and decreased demand for the low-skilled workers. And indeed, it is projected that demand for workers with lower level qualifications will drop by 3.7% annually in Ireland between 2018 and 2030, which is a drop much more pronounced actually than 2% in the EU on average. On the other hand, the demand for workers with higher level qualifications in the EU will grow slightly more rapidly than the EU on average. So many adults also do not yet have the right skills to succeed in this more interconnected digital world, and this graph really underscores that at this point. So specifically, it shows that only 25% of adults has problem-solving skills at level 2 or 3, which is well below the OECD average of 31%. And what does this mean concretely? It means indeed that only 25% of Irish adults can really navigate across pages and applications to solve a problem or use digital tools to facilitate or make progress towards the solution of a problem. And these are skills that I'm sure you will agree are essential for success in an interconnected digital world. It should be mentioned that this data is already a little bit dated, and we'll luckily receive some updated insights into the skills of people in Ireland in the upcoming 2 years. And also, not all businesses actually are ready to tackle these future skills challenges. So the ability of businesses in Ireland to adapt to changing circumstances varies greatly across different types of businesses. For instance, the adoption of new technologies in Ireland has been really uneven across sectors, and the result is large gaps in performance between different types of businesses. So this figure, I moved a couple of slides. This figure shows the large productivity gap between foreign-owned and locally owned enterprises. And this has translated also in wage differentials between the two types of firms. And also this contributes largely to high levels of income inequality. So in conversations with stakeholders so far, actually this gap in performance between the indigenous firms and the multinational firms was really a recurring topic. So what do we aim to achieve over the course of this project? So just to start with our framework. So the objective actually of the OECD Skills Strategy Ireland is to provide an in-depth analysis and assessment of Ireland's skills system to facilitate the review of Ireland's National Skills Strategy 2025. And it follows a strategic and comprehensive approach for building a more effective skills system, which we already with our team, we've applied in more than 20 countries. And our approach is based on this framework composed of these 3 interrelated dimensions. So the first one is really on developing relevant skills across the life course, which really underscores the importance of not only developing a broad set of skills, but also developing those skills that are most in demand in the labor market and society. And the emphasis on the development of skills across the life course also highlights the importance of developing skills not only in formal education, but also informally and non-formally in workplaces, homes, and communities more broadly. So to ensure that that countries and people also gain yet full economic and social value from investments in skills, people also need to use their skills fully and effectively, which is our second dimension. And the final dimension is it brings it all together under the umbrella of strengthening the governance of skills system, which of course is key to the success of both developing and using skills. And we'll talk then about more about whole of government approaches, effective stakeholder engagement, etc. So in consultation with the project team in Ireland, we've identified two main objectives actually for the OECD Skills Strategy project for Ireland. So first, the project will review how Ireland's existing skills strategy, the National Skills Strategy 2025 from 2016, might need to be adapted to ensure it is still fit for purpose. Because since its introduction, skill systems, of course, around the globe have been profoundly transformed by the megatrends, but also, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's therefore essential that Ireland is ready to confront these challenges and seize the opportunities of the future by adapting its skill system to these new realities. And the second point is indeed that this project, we aim to identify the current policy priorities for Ireland, which we'll do by assessing the most important challenges and opportunities facing Ireland's skill system. So to complete the assessment, we are actually actively engaging with stakeholders throughout the project to ensure that there is broad support for the identified policy priorities and the recommendations that we'll develop. And of course, this meeting today is an example of that. So in the initial scoping phase, we met already with many stakeholders, and we identified the following 4 overarching priority areas for Ireland. So these were the ones I already mentioned at the start. And we also asked in several online surveys whether there's support for them, whether people agree with the need to setting these priority areas. And luckily there is indeed very broad support. So the figure on the right shows the outcomes of a public consultation survey, which demonstrates that the vast majority considers the priority areas to be at least important and often indeed essential. And the priority areas that really stand out the most in terms of the share of respondents indicating that they are essential are indeed fostering greater participation in lifelong learning, as well as leveraging skills to drive innovation and strengthen the performance of firms. So just to give an overview of the whole project, so there are 4 main phases. So we had the scoping phase earlier this year. We had an assessment phase where indeed we had a very large workshop back in June, both virtual and also in Ireland. We had several kind of group discussions, and we're now indeed in a recommendations phase. And the objective here is to test the policy recommendations and to test them also within the stakeholders. So actually in the next weeks, so 2 weeks we will be in Ireland, and we'll have a range of workshops, and I hope many of you will join as well. Where we'll discuss the potential policy directions in more detail, and those potential policy directions will be indeed a direct input to our final recommendations. And it also, I just want to say that we really appreciate that you take the effort to create this document with your official response to the OECD Skills Strategy. And I think the timing is really good. Of course, we already have a draft list of these potential policy directions, but it could really, your input could feed into the final recommendations that will be included in the report, which we aim to launch in Q1 2023. And just to say that our inputs so far to our work are these different missions, are indeed input from bilateral meetings, discussions with the cross-departmental project team, a questionnaire has been completed by the Irish team, and of course we look on our side as well at international best practice. That's of course really one of the main reasons I think why also the OECD has been engaged here. We really want to build on what is happening in other OECD countries and share those examples with Ireland. Of course, we also built an international literature, many other OECD studies, as well as data from the OECD and other sources. So I'll now dive deeper into each of the 4 priority areas. So to start with, the first priority area on securing a balance in skills through a responsive and diversified supply of skills. So to start, why are we talking about this? So in the context of rapidly changing skills needs, of course, Ireland needs to ensure that its skill system is flexible and responsive to address skills shortages and mismatches as they emerge, as well as to plan for the future skills needs. So a diversified supply of skills is also needed to build the adaptability and resilience in the face of societal change. And in Ireland, the supply of skills is not always at keeping up with the changing demand. And yeah, businesses face large shortages, as shown here by the figure on the left. So for instance, Ireland is facing many issues in filling vacancies in STEM and construction sectors. And this is also reflected in a lot of kind of concrete skills gaps and skills shortages. And this is apparently also really an issue in your sector, based on the presentation before me. And there also are large qualification mismatches, that should be said, in Ireland. So we see that many students, for instance, are overqualified for the jobs that they have. And also many people are studying different fields of study than fields that are in high demand. That's a need showed by the figure on the right, that the need overqualification is really an issue, and particularly in sectors such as elementary occupations, technicians and associate professions. Significant shares of the workforce there have higher qualifications than required for the job. And it's not necessarily an issue, of course. Countries, people could build on these skills and adapt to it, but it is an issue when people don't have an option or would like to have another job that suit better aligned with their skill sets, but are for all sorts of variety of reasons forced to stay in jobs that are not aligned with the skill set. We also just want to highlight that the skills requirements in the labor market are changing rapidly, and this is data from online job postings, which really provides a lot of new, unique insights into the skills that are requested and how they are changing. So they, for instance, demonstrate how a range of transversal skills have become much more important in recent years. And in 2020, kind of skills related to teamwork, such as working with others, sharing information, were really among the most important skills in online job postings. And of course, also various digital skills, such as using digital tools for collaboration, for content creation, problem solving, are very frequently requested, as well as management skills, such as supervising people and leading in innovation. So these are really the top skills at the moment requested. And overall, we really see that the digital and green transitions will have major implications for the type of skills required in the labor market. And it demonstrates the importance of responsive skill systems and a diversified supply of skills to tackle the challenges of a rapidly changing world. So for this kind of first priority area, we identified 3 main opportunities for improvement. So the first one is on informing individual career choice through the provision of enhanced career guidance. So what we discuss here are multiple topics, actually. The first one that really stood out in our consultation so far is the need to improve the dissemination of online learning and careers information. So coordination and further consolidation of a plethora of online portals might be needed. And there's also a general demand to make these portals more user-friendly, relevant, and also the quality sometimes could be further improved. So this was really one of the main themes. The navigability, as also mentioned by Emma already, of this kind of generous offer of information was really something that a lot of people highlighted. And the second point is on providing high quality, accessible and continuous career guidance to all. So we want to highlight that the career guidance should be lifelong and life-wide. Also, we think that there is potential to strengthen still guidance in initial education, for instance, by starting earlier, better supporting the professionalization of counselors. And also for adults, there's a clear gap. It appears in the provision of of support services and guidance. So we will want to kind of emphasize that these services need to be provided to all adults, not only the people who are unemployed or job seekers, also people who want to just upskill and they should have access to relevant high quality information through various channels. On the second opportunity on strengthening learning and career pathways across the life course, we will talk here about the other different pathways, starting from schools and till after initial education. And regarding the pathways from schools to particularly FET and HE, what we would like to highlight is that promoting and raising awareness of FET, further education and training, is probably needed. It was a recurring theme that a cultural shift is needed, that is more appreciated. Career guidance has an important role to play here. Potentially vocational learning in schools could also be further expanded. So this was indeed really one of the themes that stood out so far, as well as the next one on the pathways within and between FET and HE. There are, of course, already many initiatives also between in the various on creating a more unified tertiary system. And we really want to build on that. The importance of better integrating pathways between FET and HE on a more systemic level will be very important. And also within FET, actually, need pathways could be further improved, including there's still the complexity of provision, for instance. And we'll also talk a little bit more about, the pathways actually from FET to the labor market. And also after for the strengthening pathways after initial education, supporting job transitions is something we really want to emphasize, as well as need guiding unemployed and inactive back to work. There are several, for instance, people with disabilities are still very much underrepresented in the labor market, and more targeted measures could be considered to help these people back to the labor market. And the last opportunity is on making the education and training provision more responsive to changing skill needs. And here we'll talk more about expanding and improving FET and apprenticeships. And regarding FET, we'll build a lot on the existing FET strategy by SOLAS. So I want to highlight that it is important to further reduce complexity, improve quality. Regarding expanding apprenticeships, we really see what appears to be one of the main obstacles there is need employers' willingness and capacity to take on apprentices. So we really want to highlight that new measures need to be considered in order to further expand them and to encourage employers to take on apprentices. And last but not least, also the funding models will be discussed. So how can funding models need support a more responsive provision, FET and HE? And we'll talk a little bit more in depth in the report, but we really want to emphasize that flexibility and adaptability of the course offering really should be encouraged. And ideally, the funding model should be underpinned by a more strategic approach for also the skills needs. I just wanted to say actually on these kind of potential policy directions, this of course was a relatively high level overview of the general direction of our project. But in the upcoming recommendations mission, we'll discuss these in more detail and we'll further refine them over the course of the upcoming months. So on the second priority area on fostering greater participation in lifelong learning in and outside of the workplace, this priority area is particularly important for Ireland since the participation rate in adult education and training is slightly above the EU average, but way behind those of top performers. And also this appears to be really an issue need for your sector. So I can imagine this will be quite an important priority area for you. So actually, while overall lack of motivation is the most important reason why adults are not participating in lifelong learning in Ireland, Irish adults are actually in fact more motivated to learn than adults in most other OECD countries. So only 1 in 3 adults did not want to participate in education and training, which is considerably lower than the almost 1 in 2 on average across the EU. And while motivation is relatively high, there are still a number of important obstacles to participation. And as shown by this figure, the 3 main reasons adults cite for not participating in learning are family reasons, busy schedules, and the cost of learning. And of course, it is important to note that this data is from before the COVID pandemic, and the provision of lifelong learning and the barriers to participation may very well have changed in the wake of the pandemic, since of course, online learning became much more accessible and common. So this does help to address some of these time-related obstacles, but still, and nonetheless, it is something Ireland should focus on. Also, a high share of enterprises in Ireland do provide already continuing training to employees, but we really see that this provision is not uniform. For example, as also shown by this figure, we can see that employer support is much lower in indigenous companies than in multinationals, also in manufacturing as compared to, for instance, service industries. also small enterprises compared with larger ones. And also there's even regional differences with much higher support, much more support for employees in Dublin compared to other regions. So this touches on a number of themes that actually cut across priority areas, including on the gap in performance between these indigenous companies and multinationals, and the specific challenges faced by SMEs. And enterprises that provide training actually also cite these kind of time limitations as the primary obstacle they face to providing more training. And enterprises that don't provide training, they really see it as the main, these time-related reasons are really the main reason for not doing so. So also for this priority area, we identified three main opportunities. So the first one is focuses on strengthening the incentives to participate in learning for individuals specifically. And here we'll talk and make a clear distinction between both financial and non-financial incentives that could be considered. So, of course, there are already many financial incentives in place in Ireland, and we think there is still actually room to further improve and expand those. For instance, there are successful incentives like free access to e-college, and possibly the scope of these incentives could be expanded. Also, targeting them at underrepresented groups, that's indeed something that Ireland really could consider. And many other countries already really try to kind of really direct their support structures to specific groups, for instance, by adjusting the eligibility criteria to support measures. For instance, if you want to benefit from this incentive, you have to kind of provide a little bit of background information, for instance, based on a selection of low qualification levels, employment in specific sectors, for instance, you can get additional support or need access to the measure in the first place. And we also think there might be actually a room or potential benefits for individual learning schemes in Ireland. So these are broader measures that could really give the individual more responsibility for their own learning pathways. And we will propose a feasibility study to make that a reality for Ireland. And regarding non-financial incentives for individuals, we think that to address these kind of time-related obstacles, more holistic support, and particularly for parents with people with children, this type of support could really help to kind of raise participation, and also potentially targeted campaigns to raise awareness of the benefits of learning might still be very beneficial. Also, on the second opportunity, it talks about these incentives, but then directed to employers. And of course, also employers in the community and voluntary sector should be considered here. And again, we make a distinction between the financial and non-financial incentives. So regarding financial, we think there might be room to expand the capacity of effective employer engagement programs in Ireland, such as SkillNet Ireland, Spotlight for Skills. These are very successful, and even SkillNet is, for instance, even in the international context, often quoted as a really good and interesting example. So expanding the capacity might really be relevant to reach even more enterprises in the different regions. We also think that better targeting and tailoring and support structures to SMEs might be very beneficial. Again, the SMEs are lagging behind indigenous companies. Smaller indigenous companies have lower participation, so more targeted and tailored support could really be beneficial. Also, the National Training Fund might be considered to be restructured to more actively incentivize employers to provide training. And regarding non-financial incentives, we think a couple of things stand out, such as supporting more support to map out the skill sets of employees, providing more information and guidance as well to these employers, and also promoting on-the-job training with the best practice exchange. And regarding flexibility and accessible learning opportunities, which is the third opportunity, we would like to encourage Ireland to invest even more in the flexibility of the provision by promoting online modular programs across FET and HE. Micro-credentials are key here, better rewarding learning. And regarding accessibility, also there might be room for strengthening recognition of prior learning. And of course, one thing that should be taken into consideration with the expansion of online learning is that still a significant portion of the of the population in Ireland does not have the digital skills required to participate in these activities. So further investing in these digital skills is indeed actually key for the long-term success of the overall lifelong learning system. And I will now speed up a little bit because I'm taking a lot of time, I see. I'm already presenting for 27 minutes, so I'll speed up a little bit. But on the third priority area, leveraging skills to drive innovation and strengthen the performance of firms, we want to highlight that, of course, it's not only about developing skills, but also indeed using skills. And to start, there really are indications that Ireland could better use their talent to drive innovation. So Ireland's base of research talent relative to the size of the labor force is actually stronger than the EU on average. But Ireland still lags behind in leading in innovating economies, with, for instance, comparatively low rates of innovation within enterprises. And also Irish enterprises are less likely, for instance, to have a product market strategy oriented around innovation. This is really one thing Ireland could focus on. Also, of course, leadership and management capabilities are, of course, key to implement more innovative workplace practices, better use the skills, raise productivity, and raise overall performance. And while these managerial skills are important in all countries, employers in Ireland consider them comparatively often to be really vital for the development of their business. So this really highlights the importance to continue investing in these leadership and management skills. And we also always look in this context at the so-called high-performance workplace practices, these organizational and management practices that are known to positively affect the organization's capacity to use skills, develop skills, etc. And looking at Ireland, we see sort of a mixed picture. So Irish firms are, for example, more likely to communicate their vision and mission to staff, to assign greater value to training. But they're also less likely to use financial levers such as variable pay to motivate staff or to offer employees autonomy over their time and when they schedule tasks. So the three overarching opportunities that we have for this priority area are, well, the first one, better utilizing Ireland's research talent and infrastructure to drive innovation within firms. And this really builds on the first point I made there on better using this kind of relatively large supply of research talent. So in this context, we would like to propose to strengthen the strategic positioning of skills and also improve the connectivity within the wider policy domains. And of course, we also want to promote more mobility of research talent and collaboration within the Irish SMEs. So these are really the two main pillars we want to highlight in this context. Regarding the second opportunity on promoting the continuous improvement of leadership and management skills with enterprises, we think there's still the potential to raise the motivation of Ireland's managers to upgrade their skills and participate in lifelong learning. So, for instance, well, the provision is there. Indeed, many people are just simply not aware. So there is indeed potentially levers could be used to indeed, such as management certification, funding contingency. This could really help to kind of strengthen the incentives for management development. And also what we think is that strengthening and better targeting support and incentives for enterprises looking to enhance management capability is something to further consider. And particularly indeed these time and financial constraints need to be addressed. And we also think there might be potential to strengthen referral between regional agencies. And the third opportunity is on incentivizing and enabling enterprises to make better use of skills of their workers through innovative workplace solutions. So in this context, we think also the strategic focus on these organizational practices and workplace innovation as a driver of productivity improvement could be further strengthened. This is really a key point that we want to make here, I think. So we also want to embed, for instance, workplace innovation really as an explicit priority in the National Skills Strategy. Also raising awareness and motivation among employers and particularly SMEs to implement these HPWPs is very important. And also, better targeting again support for Irish firms and adopting them is something we want to highlight. And the last priority area, albeit this is probably a bit less relevant for indeed this audience, so I will really go through it very quickly, but it's on strengthening the overall governance across the joint upskill system. And what we want to discuss here is, of course, the complexity of Ireland's skill system, and that it really requires a whole of government approach. So there are many departments, many different organizations involved, and the mechanisms need to be there to ensure that they all effectively cooperate together. Also, of course, the same could be said about the stakeholder engagement more broadly. So Ireland has developed already several mechanisms for engaging non-governmental stakeholders on skills at the national and regional levels, and they're also, of course, overseen by different departments. But yeah, while these arrangements are all steps in the right direction, stakeholders really signal that there's still space for further improving Ireland's approach to stakeholder engagement on skills, and to really make sure that these arrangements work effectively and efficiently together. So yeah, some examples are presented here on the slide. So the three opportunities there for this last priority area on promoting a whole of government approach, where indeed we want to highlight these kind of mechanisms for collaboration, cooperation, coordination on skills policy across the government. And we'll talk a lot there about the National Skills Council and even how it potentially could be revamped. Also supporting the effective implementation of the renewed National Skills Strategy. The second opportunity really focus on this engagement of stakeholders. And we'll talk there about how to include them in helping to shape skills policy priorities. Again, with a very relevant role for the National Skills Council, as well as also the regional skills forum, for instance. And also engaging stakeholders in the design of education and training as one of the key objectives. And the last point touches upon actually the information provision. So skills information is, of course, key to inform policy. And we think that still, although there's a lot of information available, we think it could still be strengthened, the collection of skills information, particularly on, for instance, skills shortages, skills gaps, and also better using the available data is something by both government and other stakeholders is something we emphasize. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I hope that gives a good overview of where we are now, and yeah, I'm happy to respond to any questions to this presentation later on. And yeah, we very much look forward also to the document that's been prepared by Doyle with the neat reflections on the recommendations and the priority areas that I just presented. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bart. That was really a really in-depth, but also a very helpful overview of where you are at currently. So I think if you're coming to Ireland in a couple of weeks' time, and myself and Mairead and others will be at one of those workshops, certainly everybody who's here today has had a sneak preview, hot off the press, so to speak. So so thank you very much for sharing that with us, and bear in mind that it has been recorded. So if the detail was very dense for some, you can go back and listen to us. So I'm moving on now to the next section. I'm going to hand over to Mary Doyle, who is, I guess, sets herself up as a retired civil servant. She was Deputy Secretary at the Department of Education and Skills from 2012 until when she retired in 2018. And she led then the higher and further education divisions in the department. And she's had a senior role in the Department of the Taoiseach and in the Department of Health over many years. She's elected a fellow, a member of the Royal Irish Academy, and is a fellow in public policy in the Long Room Hub Arts and Humanities Institute in Trinity College. And for full disclosure, she's also a board member of the Wheel and chairs our board subcommittee on this entire programme, Human Capital. So I'll leave it to Mary to bring in the rest of the panellists, and in due course, including a Q&A, and hand back to me at about 3 minutes to 12 o'clock. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. Good morning, everybody, and you're welcome. We're delighted to be here this morning because obviously, as we've heard from previous speakers, this is a really important national agenda, and we've been working hard in the Wheel over the last number of years to think through how best the sector can interact with this skills agenda, what it can bring to the table, what it needs, what are the issues as it moves forward. And this morning is a really terrific opportunity, I think, to interact with the review of the skills strategy, which the OECD are helping with, and to channel the views of the sector about its needs and its potential in the future into this really important debate. So thanks very much to the previous speakers. I think that's been such a valuable and rich setting of the scene. So we're hoping in this panel session to introduce some more perspectives into the discussion. It's not an easy one, really, because given the kind of the range of the sector and the variety of activities that take place within it, the different levels at which those activities transact. So what we are trying to do this morning in asking our panel to contribute is to give a good and rounded sense of the sector, what actually transacts on the ground, what people are thinking about, what their priorities are, and importantly, what the potential is if we have a better policy and governance ecosystem in place. So I'm delighted to be joined by 5 people this morning, and I'll introduce them to you in turn, but they are Dennis Leamy, Pat Reen, Mary O'Connor, Suzanne Connolly, and John McAvoy. And they each have a particular perspective to bring to bear on this discussion. So I'm going to invite Dennis Leamy to actually speak first. He is, as many of you will know, Chief Executive of Cork Education and Training Board, and has been since April 2019. And previously also, many of you will have known him as CEO of PUBL, which is an Irish government interagency body for social inclusion and local community development. Dennis has extensive experience over the years in dealing with a wide range of public policy issues, including managing youth and family projects in Ireland and across the EU. He's chair of the OECD Local Economic and Employment Development Directing Committee, again since 2018, and he's vice chair of the Munster Technological University governing body. So he has a wealth of experience to bring to this discussion. So over to you, Dennis.
Thanks very much, Mary. Yeah, and look, it was really interesting listening to the other presentations, and I suppose particularly a number of things struck me, and I suppose reflecting on my own experience coming from PUBL in the past, but also now in my role as Chief Executive of the Education and Training Board in Cork, a few things really struck me. In terms of the community advantage sector, that figure that Mairead mentioned, of course, and around 170,000 employees in the sector. And the huge variety of work that the whole sector is engaged in terms of supporting a load of different areas that are key and critical for society and for the economy. And there's a real opportunity there in terms of the upskilling, reskilling, all the employees that are involved in the sector, and building the capacity that's already there, but building it out more critically for the future. And I think that was really reflected in the Indicon report that was done a couple of years ago. I suppose the other piece that strikes me in terms of the community advantage sector is, and I would often reflect on this, is the reach that the community advantage sector has into areas that many public sector organizations may not have, or private sector organizations, and especially at a time now when there's a significant maybe skills gap, or indeed there's we're looking for skills in different areas. There's a real opportunity to utilize and build on the reach that the community advantage sector has to those different areas, especially in terms of disadvantaged areas, or to people that mightn't generally engage in the labor market, and there's an opportunity to build on that. In terms of the community advantage sector, I'm always struck by the sheer efforts that people go well and beyond the cause in terms of the work that they're involved in terms of responding to the need that's there. But I think it's now we need to focus on how we support the whole sector, the workforce across the community advantage sector, in terms of the role that they're involved in. And in particular, I would focus on the leadership and management capacity of organizations. I suppose the way that organizations are funded, especially in the community volunteer sector, they tend to be funded for activity basis, you know, in terms of carrying out activity within various communities or to different cohorts of individuals or groups. But what often organizations struggle with, I suppose, and from talking to organizations, is being funded for the core piece in terms of the leadership capacity, the governance capacity, and it's looking at how that needs to be built is key and critical. And I think there's an opportunity here in building the skills of the leadership across the community and voluntary sector, because in terms of the funding that comes from public sector to the community voluntary sector, it is very important that there's a governance capacity there, so that the funding is there's an accountability there for the fund, and how that funding is reflected back in terms of the impact of the work that's happening on the ground. Now, in order to do that, I think we have to look at how those organizations are supported from a capacity point of view, are supported from a skills point of view in order to be able to do that. The other piece that strikes me, and it comes from the reflection there from the OECD, and indeed it was also reflected from the department through Emma, in terms of the importance that the Department of DFERS and also Minister Simon Harris is placing on the whole tertiary sector in terms of further education and higher education, and investing in that for now and for the future. But I also think a key and critical partner to that are the community and voluntary sector. Indeed, through the education and training boards, we support a lot of community education organizations, and indeed they're well supported through with AINTAS and NALA as well. But there's also, I think, a requirement to support the leadership capacity and skills that are within those organizations, so that maybe in future funding we could look at the scope of funding, that it's not just about the delivery of training to individuals within communities or groups, but that it's also about supporting the capacity of the organization to engage. Another piece, and I suppose a reflection of what's coming through the OECD work as well, is in terms of the skills shortages or skills gaps that there are within the economy, especially around the green and digital areas. And like there are many community voluntary organizations which are engaged in those areas, and it's how we engage with that and support that. I think one of the key pieces that community voluntary sector brings, in my experience, in terms of working with people that are in particular hardest to reach or across communities, is working with people and supporting people around interpersonal skills, working and supporting people around what are sometimes referred to as the softer skills. But these skills are as important, if not more important sometimes, than some of the key component skills that people tend to focus on in terms of technical skills. And there's a real opportunity to build on that capacity and to engage further with community and voluntary sector in relation to that. Of course, the National Adult Literacy Strategy, which the Department and Minister launched last year, the community and voluntary sector is key to that, in terms of and community education providers work in collaboration with the statutory sector in terms of supporting that. And again, it's because of that relationship that the community and voluntary sector has, that when policies are rolled out, be it at national or regional level, because there's an already established relationship there, there's an opportunity to build on that, and we're able to build on what's already in place. I was struck by some of the pieces that was going through some of the initial OECD findings in relation to, the regional piece. In terms of there's a quite substantial capacity within certain areas of the country, but there's also an opportunity from a regional perspective to build that out further. And community voluntary organizations are well placed, especially around the lifelong learning piece, to engage in that. So, for example, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago around the learning region in the southern region. But what I was struck by was there was all the statutory agencies and the higher education, the further education providers there, but there was very little. There wasn't the community and voluntary sector there, even though they do a huge amount of work on that. So it's important that we open up that link with the community and voluntary sector in building the learning regions or learning cities for the future. And building the capacity of the organizations is key. Also, the links with the public sector employers, make sure that there's an equality in terms of that linkages between FE, HE, and community sector, and building that tertiary system for the future is really important from my own perspective. And I think that's all I can say for the moment, Mary. I'm happy to come back at a later stage.
Thanks very much indeed, Dennis. And I'm going to invite all the panelists, in fact, to turn on their videos at this point, we will then take the Q&A session. I appreciate that, Dennis. Very valuable perspectives there. So I'd now like to introduce Mary O'Connor. Mary is CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport. She graduated in 2016 from University College Cork with a Master's in Voluntary and Community Sector Management. And before joining the Federation, Mary worked with the Camogie Association as Director of Technical Development and Participation. She has a distinguished career in sport. She's amassed a total of 12 Senior All-Ireland medals over a 16-year career in camogie and ladies football, and she received an honorary doctorate from the UCC in recognition of her amazing contribution to sport in Ireland. And people sometimes don't recognise how important the sporting organisations are in the context of the overall community and voluntary sector. So we're really interested and looking forward to hearing from you, Mary. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Mary, and it's great to be joining everybody this morning, especially after the momentous night we had last night for Irish women's sport with the girls qualifying for the World Cup. From a Federation of Irish Sport point of view, if I could just put us in context, our work is a representative body. We would have 110 members who are made up of 81 national governing bodies of sport and 29 local sports partnerships. And in our work, we provide different services, but in our advocacy for our members, the one thing that we get weekly is that piece around the work that they do on the ground. And I think if you look at the sports sector, sometimes it is taken for granted in the sense that people want to be entertained by it and compete in it or participate in it, but they don't see it as a business that's underpinned by an army of volunteers. And just to throw a few stats at people's recent research by Sport Ireland states that there's approximately 450,000 people volunteer for sport in this country on a weekly basis and give an average of 3.5 hours per week. So that's an estimated value of 1.5 billion to the Irish economy through volunteer effort. As I said, the professional staff in the sector is an estimated sports-related staff of 64,000. And what we're finding is with the people enter to work into the sports sector, obviously they have professional skills, but sometimes they move into the sports sector because of that altruistic nature, that emotive involvement, and that that vocational, they want to get involved in sport. And I think sometimes that can lead to burnout and lack of staff retention. So we need to reflect on that as a sector, because altruism is all well and good, but we've got really good people who are connected to their work. We need to ensure that they're supported. Because the working model is evolving all the time. And I think COVID has shown that to us. What sport does every day is it promotes social cohesion. It impacts every community in Ireland. So when you have professionals and volunteers working together for a common aim, that actually can have a transformational effect. And if you look at the current skills strategy to 2025, it speaks about improving lives, developing the economy and making Ireland a better place to live. And we would say the sport and physical activity do that on a daily basis. But from our point of view, what we would like to see for the sector is to make an impact in the community. If we're going to continue to make that impact, is a co-design between the sports sector and the further education sector and the higher education sector as essential. And what I mean by that is for people who are in education, thinking of having a career in the sports sector, that there would be a balance between the theory and the practical side of their engagement before they come out of education. And also then, if there are people already working in the sport and physical activity sector, that there would be an opportunity for them to continue their development in their professional, and that the barriers are removed. So there's innovative design as to how people already working in the sector can be supported to continue. And then obviously we have volunteers who are doing such great work. And obviously when you're receiving public money, you need to ensure that there's transparency in how that funding is spent, but also that our volunteers are equipped in a governance model to do that work appropriately, and there's training provided to them, because compliance is obviously key now as well. From our side of the house, we'd also like to see a workforce development strategy, and that's aligned to the skills priorities. So obviously digital literacy is important for professionals and volunteers in the sector, as is leadership and management. That's critical because when you're involved in an organisation that's very diverse, we're a very multicultural society now, we need to ensure that we're including everybody and we're bringing everybody with us, and everybody feels they can be involved in the sport and physical activity sector in Ireland. The leadership and management at both professional and volunteer is key. Obviously communicating our story and making sure that people can become involved. That's also another skill that probably underrepresented or underthought of, and also project management. We have an awful lot of investment now in terms of initiatives and programs, and if we're going to make them sustainable and to evaluate them correctly, we need to have those skills around project management. We'd also like to see a research model on digital readiness in the sector. I think COVID-19 has forced us down the sector of, the digital engagement. But I'd like to see how digital ready people are to move on to the next phase. Has it impacted the sector? We're at the moment doing work with University College Cork on succession planning and volunteerism. And we're looking at that whole question around, is there a generational impact of the digital engagement from COVID? Is there a change? Is that a challenge? Is it a good thing? And finally, Mary, from our point of view, we'd like to see a continual focus on that governance structure, but that would be built on a regional capacity in the sector. I think that's really important. The Federation of Irish Sport, our offices are based in Dublin, and we do an awful lot of work trying to ensure that we build regional capacity. A lot of the national governing bodies are based in Dublin, but we have a network throughout the whole country. So we need to make sure that our training and educative opportunities are available regionally to ensure that we're bringing everybody with us. So from our point of view, we're delighted to be here today. We're delighted to be involved in this. And I think the key message from us is that, sport and physical activity, it is a business, but it's also underpinned by those volunteers who make sport happen on the ground, and they need to be supported because, if we're going to retain our professional staff and we're going to retain our volunteers, we need to ensure that they have an outlet to progress either professionally or feel supported as volunteers in the sector.
Mary, thanks very much. Indeed, some really insightful and important perspectives in that, which I think will give us all plenty of food for thought. Thanks very much indeed. So I'd now like to introduce our next panelist, who is Pat Reen. Pat works for a not-for-profit disability organisation, which is Prosper Group, and he's progressed that organisation from a one-room service to a provider spanning Fingal and Meath within 27 locations. Today, Prosper provides day services, residential respite, residential, supported living and clinical services. He has a high reputation within the intellectual disability sector and is known for innovation, problem solving, and providing advice and mentoring to younger CEOs. But Pat will have important perspectives to add to the discussion. So over to you, Pat. You're on mute, I think.
It's a good start. Good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. And it's a topic that's very near my heart. As stated, I'm the CEO of a disability organisation. Its name is Prosper, and we have services in both counties, Meath and Dublin as well. I've been given 8 minutes or so to discuss a career that spans over 30 years. So it's a generational perspective on disability. And I think I need to go back. Our organisation was founded in 1978. It was founded by parents and friends of adults with intellectual disabilities. Why did they found that organisation? Is because the option was to lose their son or daughter to institutional care. So what they wanted to do was create a solution, the solution being that they could create a community service for local adults with intellectual disability. And they achieved that. And in the 60s, 70s and 80s, parents and friends groups up and down the country made that solution happen. And we're just one of those. So at that time, What they want to see was their son or daughter leave their homes in the morning, go to their service, and come back in the evening time to their homes, to the bosom of their family, and the bosom of their community as well, rather be taken away into an institutional setting. Very laudable objective, and it's been achieved up and down the country. Today, 70% of the specialist disability services are provided by the voluntary sector in this country. It's a significant number, and it hits every parish of Ireland. Those early projects that were set up, and I came into those in a way, they were set up really about a very sheltered environment. They're called community workshops or sheltered workshops, and they were set up around a safe, secure, risk-averse environment with lots of activities to engage the individuals in group settings. And if you fast forward now to today, right, and that's literally a generation of change has happened, particularly in the last 10 years, where the inputs we have today are all about outcomes. What are the outcomes for the individual rather than the inputs? And what's extraordinary is how ordinary what the things people are looking for. The people today we support, each individual we support, and every organization like us, they ask the service user, what do you want in your life? And what they ask for employment. They ask for independent living. They ask for friends. They ask for relationships. They ask for an opportunity to be treated like an adult. They ask for money in their pocket. They ask for all normal things, better health. It goes on and on and on. But there's nothing extraordinary in what they're asking for. So that has created a quantum shift in a very short period of time from a supervised, segregated environment to one that's about the individual and the individual in their community. And that has put a huge weight of pressure on organizations to respond. Whereas before you had set timetables, programs for the group, now you're trying to deliver individualized solutions based on the needs and wishes of each individual. A challenge for the staff and the workforce, and for the organization who's overseeing the project. It doesn't stop there, the challenge though. Over that period of time, particularly the last number of years, HICWA came into that space for residential provision. The whole regulation and standards came in, and rightly so. And they've upped the bar to a huge level for the workforce and for the management. So they oversee, in our context, our residential provision and our respite provision. And we have to meet the standards accordingly. And then in our day service provision, the HSE brought in interim standards. And again, before HIC will go into that space eventually, and that has upped the bar again. So now we have a workforce that is trying to deliver individualized services and now deliver those individualized services to set standards. And then what's happened most recently is the significant demands around governance and compliance for our organizations as well. So literally, particularly, I say over the last 10 years, the change in our sector has been transformational. We're all on the back foot on it, how to keep responding to the ever-ending demands on the organization. And then we come along and say, it's not stopping here, it's keep going, this change is going to keep going, because only recently there, in 2021, the Disability Capacity Report was, a review report was launched. And it talks about the needs of disability up to 2032. And that fits into the Slán to Care report as well, which looks at transformational change over a 10-year period as well. So what that report said on disability was, up to 2032, there's going to be a 17% increased demand. That currently there's about 1,000 extra new day places wanted every year, and that's going to roll on. And if we want to address residential provision, we need to come up with close on 4,000 new residential beds over the next 10-year period as well. So clearly what you're looking at is a very, very pressurized and stressed sector within this country. A lot of legacy issues are still there from the recession, but also too, it's been compounded by a growing population and the celebration of an older population, but it is still a new challenge for us. In that regard, on the aging population, we see that there's an expectation of 25% increase in over 55s up to 2032 for the people we support. So I know these are a lot of stats. Now, what does it mean on the ground though? It means that we are under pressure to keep up with the change in our sector. we're under pressure to both recruit and retain staff. And we're also under pressure to keep responding to this change agenda and this new challenge we have. So I've been thinking about this, and most of the speakers earlier on, gave all the solutions, right? But I suppose Bart talks about how critical transferable skills are, and that's our world, transferable, right? Because every person we support is individual. That means their wish list and their needs are different from the next person. So working with others, he talked about in that context, he talked about accessing and analyzing data, and that's critical how we deploy our resources, and also providing support to people. We have a very complex, challenging sector. However, I think the workforce we have are responding, but responding without structured training and development, right? And I think that's really where we need to go on here. We have, when a key worker, one of our staff supports an individual, and that individual wishes around employment or independent living or doing further training, our staff members meant to have that skill set and that knowledge, how to access these solutions and how to access these outcomes for people. And they work very diligently at that particular challenge. And they build a lot of knowledge in that area as well to meet the needs of the clients we support. But it's not recognized. That whole continuous professional development within our sector doesn't exist. I mean, we should be able to bolt on, I suppose, accredited, I suppose, skill sets that our people achieve. And I think that would be a very attractive addition to our sector, that you can actually have that continuous professional development for particular themes and topics that our end user wants. I think also too, there's a great opportunity for apprenticeships here. We currently work with 12 secondary schools, and there's really some fine young people say, I'd love to go into this sector, but we would love to be the sponsor of those individuals, because not alone would it'd be a great investment, because you're getting people they're local, they know the organization, they know who we work for, and so therefore they feel more invested. So we think these are people that could be retaining the organization over the longer period. Recently, we took on 4 graduates just to change things up in our organization, that whole graduate investment, that, the business world, in the broader sense, the commercial business world, we see the benefit of that. Fresh thinking is making us challenge how we do our business, which is a real great asset as well. I think ring-fenced budgets in our sector is so important. We really have to allocate a set figure every year and ensure that that figure is invested into both the retention and development of our staff. The independent report, as you mentioned there, she said there was a skills deficit, and there is a skills deficit. And we know we have to address that, particularly with the challenges we're facing into the future. Most of our business now is going on to, I suppose, IT platforms. A huge number of our staff saying, we're not ready for this. We don't have the IT skills for this world we're going into. We need training. We need basic training on IT before we come along and use the platforms you want us to use as well. And also, I'm really interested in Bart talking about there, the value of social and emotional skills, right? Because if we can develop training programs in that regard, we would really be moving into the next generation of service provision, and to the benefit of the individual staff member, the organization, and most especially the service user. I think that, like most of the solutions were called up already by the other speakers. If we can have a coherent plan of where the community and voluntary sector fits into that and not be forgotten outside the door. Recently there we talked, well, many of the speakers spoke about leadership training. I did my course on leadership, and I was the only person that came from the voluntary sector into that course, and very able individuals were on that course, coming primarily from multinational companies. They couldn't make head nor tail who I was and where I came from. But by the end of the course, they knew who I was, because they actually realized, as Dennis talked about, it reaches into their life if they think deeper. We reach into the communities and everybody's life. When it would be disability, be it elderly, be it sport, be it advocacy, we reach in and we help people in the most meaningful ways. I'm very proud of what we do. I'm very proud of what we deliver on. I think the culture, I think we have the richest jobs to give to people in Ireland, in the sense that there's such benefit to them, there's such value in them, but also to there can be such that can be so rewarding if we invest in people into the future and the challenges they meet. I know this is 8 minutes to talk about 32 years. Sorry if I overlook things, but I think we're all on the same track together. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Thanks very much, Pat. A lovely combination there of the strategic and the practical. Lots to work with. Thank you very much for that. So I'm delighted now to introduce John Evoy, who's General Manager at Grow Remote, a social enterprise on a mission to enable us to work, live and participate locally. Previously, John was Social Enterprise Development Fund Manager at Rethink Ireland, where he managed a wide portfolio of social impact investments. He's also the founder of the Irish Men's Sheds Association, for which he won a number of awards, including the People of the Year Award in 2015. So look forward to hearing from you. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thanks to everybody at the wheel for progressing, I suppose, this very, very important conversation. I'm quite conscious of the time because I think we need to leave some time for questions. So I'll try and be concise. At Grow Remote, we're a very young organisation, like in particularly compared to some of the colleagues on the panel. You know, and we were set up a year or two before the COVID pandemic, which was an ideal time, I suppose, for an organisation who was focused on remote work. And we were really, I suppose, glad to be in the right place at the right time to support lots of organisations, including C&V organisations, I suppose, to thrive or to at least deal with the challenges they faced during that time. We work with both employers and communities to kind of build out the ecosystem for remote work across the country. And I suppose it's a supply and demand kind of model. You know, if we work on both sides of that, we'll create more jobs, and our long-term social impact vision, therefore, is like to see all communities, rural and regional, you know, to thrive, because there's more people working and living and spending their money locally, and they don't have to either migrate to the cities or commute. But why is all that relevant, I suppose, to this conversation? You know, both employers, whether in the C&V sector or not, and their employees or potential employees needs to upskill very quickly in the skills for remote work over the last few years. There would have been a small number of remote, fully remote organisations already in the country who we've used, you know, to take their policies and practices and share them widely. So one of the first things we did in partnership with Laois Shoffley, ETB, Solus and the IDA was to develop training programs for leading remote teams for people managers and remote work ready or thriving remotely training courses for either job seekers looking for remote work or people already working but wanted to transition to remote. And those courses were very successful, obviously a lot of take up because of the situation we found ourselves in. And subsequently we partnered with the Wheel to like specifically invite people working in the broadest version of the non-profit sector to undertake some of those training courses. And we've a couple of 100 people gone through those training courses in partnership with Wheel. But I suppose important to say in the context of this conversation that I feel that that's only, you know, the tip of the iceberg if we think about like what Mairead said earlier, of 170,000 employees in the sector, and even more than that people volunteering. We would estimate just from some little bits of data, we don't have accurate data fully available, we're waiting on the outcome of the census, but that at least a third of these 170,000 employees are in some way working remotely or in a hybrid manner right now, and that's a huge transition over a short period of time. So I think the demand and the need for remote skills or remote work and like culture and ideology and all that stuff is in huge demand. And you know, it's a very fast period of change for organizations. Many organizations in the sector are small organizations with small teams who are really busy, who don't really have the capacity to be sending their staff on training courses all the time, you know, and so we have to be agile. I noticed that was one of the recommendations. We had to be agile and responsive, and I suppose take into account the capacity of organizations to you know, facilitate their team members to upskill. You know, I do remember a saying, I'm sure we've all heard, you know, where finance managers talking to the CDP person about, you know, we can't afford the training, and the thing was, you know, but we'll train them and they leave. And the response is, yeah, but what if you don't train them and they stay? So I think that's, relevant to this sector. I think also very relevant is like maybe even more so pre the pandemic. A lot of people who were motivated to work in the non-profit sector were doing so out of a personal sense, a commitment, an interest in a specific social mission, for example. And I suppose that was one of the things that gave the sector the opportunity, I suppose, to attract and retain talent that mightn't have been, that might give them an advantage over other sectors. But we're definitely seeing the kind of democratization of work, with remote work where people can choose to live and work wherever they want a lot more. That some of those advantages, I think, that the nonprofit sector had in attracting and retaining talent has been leveled out because of other perks such as, and I don't want to say flexible working isn't a perk. I think it should be, just the way everybody works where possible. But I think that is a challenge facing the sector. So we definitely need to, to make every effort to have working and staying in the sector as attractive as possible, to potential, I suppose, employees in the sector, whether that's people who are currently in school or undergrads or people who may be considering, a change in direction in their career. We know that there's a lot of people who are moving jobs right now, probably more than ever before. People are maybe they've reflected a little bit over the last few difficult years to think about, okay, what are they doing with their lives, and what do they want to spend their time at, and and to spend that time meaningfully, and that can mean different things to different people, obviously. I suppose a point I was trying to find a way to articulate earlier on is, the importance, obviously, of the sector to, have the biggest possible impact from the work we do, the biggest possible social impact and value for money. So we kind of see, impact, income, and innovation as three sides of a triangle, and it's a cycle that drives success, and for me, innovation is very closely linked with upskilling and, having a team that are at the, I suppose, the forward edge of forward thinking of technology and so on. And really without those three things, I think organizations will struggle, I know this is not new to people who are so passionate about education and training, like everybody on the call today. But I think it's just another way of looking at just how important it is to keep upskilling the sector as much as possible going forward. And I am conscious of the time because I'm sure you want to finish at 12 sharp, but I'm really happy to hang on after to answer questions, and I'll finish up a bit quick.
Very good. Appreciate that, John. I think very well articulated around the sort of challenges and opportunity that the sector faces at the moment, and the potential solutions. Thank you very much for that. Our final panelist, and I think we're probably all conscious of time, but that's the bad luck of the draw, Suzanne, I'm afraid. Suzanne is our final panelist. She is CEO of Bernardo's Children's Charities 2018, and prior to that she was Director of Children's Services at Bernardo for 17 years. And during this time she's led the transformation of the Bernardo's Children's Services to become needs-led and outcome-focused, with a clear organisational commitment to evaluation of the work. Very important set of issues there. And in her earlier career she was a social worker and also a service provision manager in the UK and Ireland. So over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks very much, and it's great to be here and have an opportunity to contribute. I'd like to start first of all by really thanking the Wheel for organising this event, and particularly I think Mairead's presentation was really excellent, and it contextualised the importance of the sector and to Irish society, and indeed how much the sector contributes. And therefore it's fantastic that we have this opportunity to contribute to the OECD's report and to their recommendations. So I'm just going to take you on a little bit of a journey in the context of where Bernardo's has been. So in 2005, we were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to respond to investment opportunity from Atlantic Philanthropies. And at the time, Atlantic Philanthropies, and to a certain extent the One Foundation, they were interested in supporting Bernardo's strategic development, and they wanted to influence that. And one of the particular interests at the time was that the Bernardos would contribute to the development of the sector, because Bernardos had had a history through government funding of contributing to the early years sector. And indeed, we continue to do that because we're funded to do it, and we do it, and we do it well, we get good feedback. What the journey that we had to take the two funders on was that we hadn't invested sufficiently in our own staff. So while we were contributing to the sector, we weren't sufficiently contributing to the training development of the staff within Bernardos. And what we then were able to bring our funders with us on is the need to invest. And what we were able to do then through that investment was really say that if we wanted to be a needs-led and outcome-focused organisation, what did that mean in terms of the training and upskilling of our staff? And what we did was we engaged what really was a 4 to 5 year journey, and indeed continued over 10 years in terms of a range of training programs which we were able to deliver. And then what we had to do was really focus as well on the practicalities of that, which was how do you train staff while they're continuing to try and do the everyday job? How do you bring new ideas in? How do you enable staff who are very committed to still realize that maybe what they are doing could be done better? How can you open them towards the reality of change? And as you know, people in our sector are very committed to what they do. And sometimes it may be a journey to realize that maybe they need to change what they do. And what we learned in that context was the importance of leadership and management, the importance of people being able to be coached to do things differently. And that again is a journey in and of itself. And I think what we also had to cope with at the time as well is we wanted to keep staff, because you train staff, you actually want them to stay then, so the organisation and children and families benefit from that training. So you need to constantly be in dialogue with staff about that, so they would see themselves having a career journey within Bernardos. So what I would say is that we would not have been able to do that without the investment. We would not have been able to have the impact we had without taking our investors with us on that journey. So challenging some of their assumptions, and indeed helping them understand what they need to learn about implementation science. And the other thing I think which is really important is there's a real difference between knowledge, what you have in your head, and then the skills to use that knowledge in the everyday. And as I said earlier on, coaching is key to that, but also is the commitment we've been talking about here, which is the idea of a lifelong approach to learning and development. But the other thing we would say in Bernardos is that, and what I've learned through my own lifelong journey and my own commitment to learning and development in that context, is that real learning isn't easy, because sometimes it is about challenging your hypothesis and your assumptions. It's saying that the evidence now says that what I thought was appropriate, and to a certain extent Pat talked about in terms of disability services, what I thought was appropriate and what I thought was meeting needs actually needs to change and needs to be something now different, because the knowledge and the science has improved in that context. What I would say then is that we're now, as part of our new strategy, we're now committed to be a trauma-informed organisation, and we now want to become trauma specialists, and that in itself requires, again, more training and more development of our staff. And at the same time, what's key is the things that were highlighted in a previous contribution, is that we have to be digitally aware, we have to continue to communicate about our work, to market what we do, we have to continue to do fundraising. All of these are key. And I would be calling on the government really, and as the OCD as part of this, to recognise, because the contribution of the sector, it is key that the sector is invested in, and there are financial incentives. And absolutely the point was made, I think, by Dennis about core costs. That is crucial, because you can't deliver without a contribution to core costs. So I've deliberately kept my contribution shorter than the rest, because I just think we do need to allow a few contributions from the audience. But just to say, I think we have been fortunate in Bernardos because of investment. We've worked very hard to ensure that we have used that investment effectively, and we'll need to continue investment in the future. And the other thing to say is what we've been fortunate as an organisation, that notwithstanding we do also have to work on issues of staff retention and recruitment, but we've had a cohort of staff who've stayed in the organisation, and that's actually been key to enabling us to achieve what we continue to achieve for children and families. So thanks very much.
Very good. Thank you so much, Suzanne, and all the rest of the panelists for those valuable contributions. I'm told that we can continue the Q&A until 12:15. But some people have to leave. OECD, I know, have to go to have, and I know Dennis, you have to go as well. So again, most valuable contributions, an awful lot to unpack there. Mairead, I think you're going to help with the questions, am I right?
I am, Mary. Yes, thank you very much. And just to say thanks to the OECD team, because they've actually answered the questions that came in for them live in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will circulate those questions and answers as well after the event in case people miss them. But I think that was very helpful because there has obviously been a lot of really rich contributions. So I suppose I've just picked out a question that came in via email to the panel. And Mary, it's I suppose quite a general one that could be put maybe to all panelists or see what you think. It's about, the person is asking, what engagement structures and processes are needed to ensure that the CV sector can play its full part in shaping the national skills policy agenda? So I suppose that's it's kind of quite a broad question.
And in fact, abusing my position as chair, in fact, I do think this governance question is extremely important in the longer term. And I was, in fact, going to raise it before we had finished. So, Mairead, thank you for that. Dennis, I know you have to go. And I know that you also know about structures which cross across government. So, some initial thoughts about how this particular piece of the jigsaw might be progressed?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think there are a number of existing structures that are already in place. If I speak from the Education and Training Board's piece, we've an Education and Training Board Ireland, which represents all ETBs across the country, and there are substructures within that are very focused on this whole area in terms of skills development. And I know as part of that, the Wheel has been involved with one of those substructures in terms of engaging around the needs of the community development sector, but also around co-designing of workforce development for the sector with the sector. So that's at one level, and then I suppose there are all sorts of things like the regional skills fora, and there's the regional assemblies. There's the learning city. There's a lot of structures around the regions that the community at some places, I know there are places for the community development sector, but actually there's an absence of a place for community development sector in other fora as well. So maybe it's to look at that and look and see the capacity for the community development sector to engage in that, indeed for a place to be created in those particular structures. And then of course through the department and through SOLAS are developing the community education framework at the moment. And one of the key points that's been made through that is that it's fine to talk about the delivery of pieces, but the capacity of the organizations have to be also supported. So I think there's scope to be engaged with that structure in terms of governance. But a key point, and I'll finish this, Mary, is that as statutory authorities, we're making requirements all the time in terms of reporting and accounting. But it's also incumbent on us to support the capacity of organizations to be able to do that. And I think it's lining that up. It's critical in how these governance pieces meet.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for that, Dennis, and thank you for your contribution during the rest of the day.
Thanks very much, Mary. Thanks very much.
Mary, I think in your contribution you stressed the regional aspects as something that needed to be attended to. Any sort of what are your thoughts on what could people think about now in terms of addressing that question?
I think it's linked, Mary, to the digitalization and the readiness and an understanding of the readiness of people to engage on digital platforms. Also, I think there's regional FEs and HE facilities around the country. It's about a uniform of training provision as well, but also that provision is innovative in terms of how it's rolled out. So evening, obviously if it's somebody's a professional, that they do it during their work time, but obviously if somebody is a volunteer, that they would be able to do it online, or a blended learning model. My view would be is that in from a sporting sector in rural Ireland, because of, you know, maybe the closing of shops, pubs and so on, that the local community centre, the local sports hall is now the focal point. And sometimes people may volunteer in the sports sector because of prior experience, but also there are people who are moving into rural Ireland now who will have expertise in other areas, but possibly don't have an opportunity to engage in the local community because they're new to it. So it's a kind of a cross-pollination is what I'm trying to look for, is that it, you know, the work that John is speaking about around Grow Remote, is that there's an opportunity now to ensure that more people are included in community if they so wish to be included via a sporting network outside of anything else.
Very good. Thanks very much indeed. Do other panelists want to comment on this? Suzanne?
Yeah, I just comment very quickly. I agree completely with Mary about the opportunities for digital learning. And I think the key thing will then be to decide what can be done in that format and what will need more face-to-face. And that's particularly in terms of teaching people about social and emotional awareness and working in groups. But I do think there's real opportunities now with remote learning once it's a blended approach to that.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. John, have you anything that you want to add on this particular issue?
Not really, Mary. That hasn't been said already. Other than, like, I mean, there's been obviously an in-depth conversation today about digital skills and throughout the policy and the review, and obviously digital skills are linked very closely to remote skills, and that's something like we'd like to focus on. I think, I think, like many issues in the sector, the solutions will be sought like through collaborations by multiple stakeholders in the sector and taking all the views into account. But that's something the sector is very good at.
Very good. I'm going to ask Pat a really hard question now. So if you had a magic wand, Pat, given your experience and given, you know, where you operate, the kind of services you're operating, the challenges, where would you start? You know, what would be the big steps you would take to achieve the sort of vision that you set out in your contribution? Yeah,
before I answer that, I'm going to just go back to the last question, or just last point there. I think just to say the obvious, how to build capacity in the community voluntary sector has to be built on a recognition of the value of that sector, right? Coming from government down, right? If government believe in it in every way, not alone for its social and economic benefit to all parts of the country, then the organs of the state and the agents of the state will ensure they're included, right? So it has to come from the top down. And it's, you know, I think it's maybe coincidental we're called the third sector, because I think we're third, you know. I often believe, you know, we nearly have to justify our existence always when we're looking for funding, rather than recognizing the critical nature of what we offer. But anyway, so I think we really have to win. We have to win over government's hearts and minds of the value of our sector, and then things will fall into place. But if I was starting out, well, I suppose in a way it's very hard to put a blueprint in what is the solution here, because we're constantly, all our communities, all the community volunteer sector are in a state of flux and change always, and that's right. You know, I mean, I think what we need to be able to do is recognize, first of all, its value, and then recognize that it needs to be resourced properly, right? And professionally, in the sense that you need to understand that you need leadership, you need strategy, you need investment, and you need continuous training along that. So it's kind of, I think it's a building block system, or it's kind of not so much a building block, but it's having different component parts working together here. If I look at our own sector here, I could never have envisioned back 30 years ago where it would be now, right? How much it progressed over a generation. I couldn't have, right? Because at that stage, 30 years, they were still closing down institutions. But now, the great centre today, the great centre now is the one that's empty, that everybody we support is out in the community. And the centres are like hubs they're coming back to. And also too, society is built into this, or bought into this, as has employers, as have, we'll say, ETBs. So the canvas is there to create the next generation of services. So I think it's about recognizing that change is critical to our sector. Having really able, talented staff is critical. Having staff that are willing to change and evolve and learn and relearn is critical. Having the proper targeted investment is critical. Having I suppose, partnerships is critical. I mean, in a way, Mary, I'm not answering your question, but I'm saying this is what I've learned. And what I'm learning now is that really, if the person's heart and commitment is right, the employee, if we can get enough of them, the future will stay strong.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. Okay.
And if there's government recognition and investment as well. I that's the one thing as well, Mary. I think since, yes, funding is better now, but we're still meant to deliver the devil and all from a very limited resource.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's coming through loud and clear. All right.
Yeah.
Mairead, any other questions for the panel?
Nothing broadly. I think there was a question for Suzanne. She might come back to that in the Q&A, or we might hold on to it. I think we have. We will share anything and link people up afterwards if there are questions that remain.
Okay. Okay then. Conscious of time, we already, I think, extended our time, and I know John has to go also. So I think I simply want to reiterate the Wheel's thanks and my thanks to all the panelists for their superb contributions this morning. Deirdre will talk now about the next steps, but I know that there's been such valuable input from this discussion, which will enrich the final submission, which the Wheel will make to the OECD process. And we look forward to working with people over the next number of months, and we particularly look forward to seeing the outcome of the discussions and the work and the review of the OECD in the new document early in the new year. So it just remains for me to thank you again and hand back to Deirdre. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody on the panel. Thank you, Mary, for leading us so expertly through that and for managing the time. Really appreciate everybody who stayed on. For those who couldn't stay for this extra 10 minutes at the end, we'll obviously have the recording for people to rely on. So just in terms of wrapping up here, I want to let you know that the OECD consultation is going to be a public consultation in due course, and that will be live in the next few days. And we will be, following up with this event with letting you all know that. So, and we would be very encouraging of people to participate, informed by the debate and what you've heard here today and some of the documents that you've seen. I was particularly struck by the richness of the Mairead, if you could put up the two slides that we're finishing up with. I was particularly struck with the richness of the conversation, and really just to sort of leave you with what our plans are in terms of what happens next. And I've split it out into sort of related to the public policy side of things. We now have this skills strategy review consultation. It will be public. We will send it out directly to you. However, I guess the draft consultation that we shared with you last week in advance of today's meeting, we will now, in the light of this, be refining it further. And as I said, Mairead and myself and several other stakeholders who are here today will be present in 2 weeks' time as an in-person workshop. So it's getting refined in various layers. Dennis spoke about partnerships with the ETBs, and Pat spoke about the potential for partnership, and John Evoy spoke about an existing one. So we are, I guess, as a systematic level, working with the various ETBs at a macro level and indeed on an individual level to I guess water the ground, to create those, I guess, sectoral partnerships and to lessen the gaps between what is already existing in the ETB ecosystem and what our sector needs, and indeed the other direction in relation to individual subsectors of our sector engaging in the way to design bespoke programs that are suitable for them. And Pat mentioned that as something that is needed. The Skills to Advance program for the ETBs is a critical area there in relation to national policy. And the program that John Evoy spoke about fits neatly. It is a Skills to Advance program. Dennis mentioned the Adult Literacy for Life strategy and the community education strategy. So we have brought our sector's voice in the CPD sense, the continuous professional development sense, to enhance the voices of other partners, Aintus, NALA and others who have been working in this space for many years. we have been seeking to be, I guess, bring the upskilling of our employees and our volunteers agenda into the implementation of these spaces, because as Dennis said, if the capacity of the organizations isn't looked after as a target in itself, these organizations will not be able to play their part in the implementation of these strategies. So that's a key focus of our work. I sit on the National Training Fund Advisory Group, which is one of those I guess, governance structures. I would hope that as a result of this strategy that our sector will have a stronger voice at various different levels of the ecosystem and the governance, and that would be certainly a key aim of ours. And in that regard, we have convened a very clunkily named Community and Voluntary Sector Employers Forum, which I think we need to come up with a better name for it, but it is a network of organizations who understand this space, understand the public policy space, and want to put in a little bit of work in advising and helping us articulate some of these things that we have been talking about. And that will augment our board committee, subcommittee that Mary chairs. And I put at the end, research, data, evidence. This is what is needed. There's so many questions that were potentially asked today that really many of us don't have the answers to, and we need to have a data gathering exercise within our sector, but also to have our sector visible within the national statistics and data gathering. So I think it works in both ways. And indeed, the next slide at a very practice level, if you could move on. The Leadership Academy was launched this year in June. We have our Leadership Academy manager, Sharon Hughes. If you aren't on it, www.leadersacademy.ie. It is a phenomenal resource that has been made possible through, I guess, our work with the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. And indeed, we spoke, it was Emma or Bart spoke about the skill nets. We have a skill nets for our sector already in existence because we've been working with them for 15 years. It's called Training Links Programme, and we've been happy that it's been growing over the last 5 years in particular. So that they are key areas where the practical manifestations of this are playing out, and indeed the partnerships that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of our plans, it is facing both directions. It is facing into the policy making system to get our sector's voice heard. And Mairead, you can close those slides off there now. And it is indeed in facing in as well to you, our sector, and enabling, I guess, that interaction and that transfer of knowledge, information, and indeed so our sector can make our contribution. We need to be enabled to make our contribution. I think Pat put it very well there at the end when he spoke about recognition for our sector. Comes first from the top. So again, thank you very much. I'll wrap it up here now. I'll thank all of our speakers. I'll thank our panelists. I'll thank Emma from the department, and I'll thank Bart and his team for being present here today, and indeed for the engagement both prior and indeed following this in the review. And I guess it's a work in progress. Watch this space. And I'd be glad to hear any of your thoughts or comments or questions, and we will definitely follow up. So thank you very much. Thank you to all. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.